Welcome to Balkans Debrief from Washington, D.C. I'm Ilva Tare, a resident senior fellow at the Europe Center. Germany's recent elections are considered as the most consequential elections in Europe. The coalition of CDU and CSU, led by Friedrich Merz, has secured the victory, but the far-right Alternative for Germany, the AfD, has surged to a historic second place, signaling deep political fragmentation. With a stagnant economy, rising security concerns, and the volatile geopolitical landscape, all eyes are now on Berlin's next step. But what does this mean for the Western Balkans? Germany has long been a key player in supporting EU enlargement and stability in the region. Will Merz's government maintain that course, or will we see a shift in policy? I'm joined today by Gerald Knaus, founder and chairman of the European Stability Initiative and one of the most influential voices on EU enlargement and migration policy. Gerald, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Yeah, Ilva, it's a great pleasure to speak to you from Berlin.
So the victory of the Merz coalition means a return to conservative leadership in Berlin. With Merz ruling out cooperation with AfD, what are the most likely coalition scenarios? And what does this will mean for the political direction of Germany moving forward, and especially for the foreign policy?
Well, there really is only one coalition possible. We, as you have already explained, the far right AfD, and to put that in context, what that means, the Office for the Protection of the Constitution of Germany has found some of the key leaders of that party, 4 of its chapters in the federal states, Saxony, Thuringia, Saxon-Anhalt, and 4 of them, to be confirmed threats to the German constitution. The youth organization is a confirmed threat to the German constitution. One of the most prominent AfD leaders, a prosecutor, said you can legally call him a Nazi. This is a very radical party. It achieved its best result ever at national elections. So there is huge pressure on the parties of the center, but the result of the AfD still was only 20%. So 80% didn't vote for them. The only coalition you can now form is a Christian Democrat union. So the 2 Christian Democratic parties, CDU and CSU, plus the Social Democrats, which used to be called a great coalition, a big coalition. It no longer is such a big coalition. It's literally the only 2-party coalition that has a majority in the Bundestag, since the Christian Democrats maintain a policy that they will not, under any circumstances, anywhere, form a coalition with the far right.
What this will mean for the foreign policy for Germany?
Very interesting, because on the one hand, you could say that this is a familiar coalition. You had Social Democratic, Christian Democratic coalition for a long time under Angela Merkel. But I don't think that the past is necessarily a guide to what we will see in the future. Merz is, of course, not Merkel. He has never held a national office. He comes from the business sector. The Christian Democrats, many of their key players in the party are young, new. The Social Democrats also have new leadership. Many of those who led the party in recent years have already resigned. The younger ones are now stepping forward. And of course, the world has changed dramatically. What we saw in Germany in the last week, including from Merz, his foreign policy statements were probably the boldest of any leader of a big European country. He basically said Germany needs to prepare for a world where the US is no longer a reliable or even an ally at all. Now, to hear this from a Christian Democrat from the old West Germany is revolutionary. But many people here in Berlin say it's just realistic. He also has been agreeing to a massive expansion of the defense budget. By basically changing the constitution now, it should happen in the next few days, and allowing the defense spending to be exempt from the constitutional limits on public spending. These are signs that this could be, and I think has to be, the most consequential German government since the government of Konrad Adenauer, a Christian Democrat, in 1949, because the challenges are similarly big.
You did say that he kind of hinted to the idea that U.S. is no longer an ally. How will Europe look without U.S. as an ally? And especially Germany and the other capitals that so far have had important weight in the EU decisions, Paris, Berlin, and so on.
Well, I mean, I can tell you some of what I'm picking up here in Berlin. And I'm now talking about people who've been the most pro-American politicians in Germany and in Europe. So they observe three things. They observe how the US has been treating Canada. It's just shocking to Germans. The European Union was created to create reliability between a vast number of countries of different size. And the one rule to make the European Union work is that big countries don't bully smaller countries. Imagine if Germany would behave towards Poland or Denmark or Switzerland the way the Trump administration behaves towards Canada. So this is a real shock. The second shock is, of course, the interference by the US administration in Germany's elections on the side of the far-right AfD. This is extraordinary. The AfD wants to destroy the European Union. It is a pro-Putin party. It is against the euro. It is viciously anti-Muslim. It attacks all the other parties as basically traitors. And now the US government, the vice president, travels to Munich and meets with the leader of the AfD, and Elon Musk recommends it and says only the AfD can save Germany. I mean, this is extraordinary. And the third thing, the most important shock, is, of course, the treatment of Ukraine. Because while this resembles the way the US has dealt with Afghanistan, remember, Trump made a deal with the Taliban without really consulting with anyone. Biden then implemented it, the US withdrew, and the Europeans basically just followed. They followed the US to Afghanistan, and they followed the US out of Afghanistan. And Afghanistan collapsed and the Taliban took over, and basically 2 decades of joint war and investment were lost. But Afghanistan is not a core European interest. Ukraine is. So to see Trump repeat the same strategy, negotiations with Putin without involving Ukraine, weakening the Ukrainian government, attacking President Zelensky, lying about the Ukrainian situation, not consulting the Europeans, everything looks like Trump wants to see Kabul be repeated in Kiev. But for the Europeans, that is a national security threat. So the Europeans cannot accept this. Germany, of course, cannot accept this. It would mean millions of refugees from Ukraine, which, of course, would only help the AfD. So the sense here is that we now have a hostile administration in DC that helps all the forces inside and outside the European Union that try to destroy the foundation of European peace and prosperity. And so that means we need, in almost every respect, to rethink what German and European foreign policy looks like.
And use the art of diplomacy not to reach to this level, to the hostile level, hopefully. But we'll see how this will unfold once Merz is the chancellor. You did mention that the AfD in the second place, it is kind of alarming. But how might they, with their 20% of votes that they have, influence the debates on migration, the EU enlargement, the security issues? How influential can they be?
Well, the paradox is that because all the other parties have this policy that they call the firewall, which the vice president, J.D. Vance, explicitly criticized in Munich, but which Friedrich Merz and the leadership of his party has reaffirmed daily in the last few weeks, saying that they're on publicly in every debate, every statement, that the firewall will be maintained. This really limits the influence of AfD. Its influence comes from the fear of what would happen if Germany goes the way of Austria. In Austria, the far-right brother of the AfD, the FPÖ, won the last elections last September. It came first with 29%, and it almost looked like there might be a far-right chancellor in Austria. This also was avoided at the last minute. And the big fear in Germany, and this is the AfD's influence on politics, is what does it mean for Europe? Of course, for Germany too, if you have a government like that in Germany. And so everything needs to be done, and this is the sense of the people who negotiate now for the coalition agreement, to make sure, including on migration, that you have policies that stop the rise of the AfD without copying what is essentially an anti-European agenda. I mean, AfD wants to get rid of Schengen, wants to get rid of the European court. You no longer have to listen to international courts. It wants to build a fence around Germany. It wants a fortress Germany. None of the other parties want that. So they will need a migration policy that reduces irregular migration fast without destroying Europe. And that's the debate. I've had a lot of conversations the last 10 days with leaders in both parties as they prepare and think how to achieve that.
And I'm more interested on the Western Balkans. I know Europe has its own trouble now, but how will this impact the Western Balkans and the role that Germany, as a staunch supporter of the region until now, has been? Will Germany have the possibility? I saw the proposed 500 billion infrastructure fund that aims to revitalize the economy. Do you think this will lead to greater investments in the Balkans as well, or Berlin will turn inward and prioritize domestic concerns?
Well, it's very striking. We had a conversation, I think, in one of your first podcasts on our proposal of opening
the very first one.
Yes, opening the single market, because my feeling and that of my colleagues for many, many years was that the current enlargement process is not leading anywhere. Now, I don't know how much time has passed since the first podcast, but what we are seeing
3 years, almost 3 years.
So in the last 3 years, everything we feared has come true. The process is not leading anywhere. I mean, no country is closer to joining the European Union, not Montenegro, not Serbia, not North Macedonia. And there is increasing frustration in Moldova among voters. We saw it in the last elections. And even among civil servants in Ukraine who, despite the war, want to and work hard on joining the EU. Now, this idea we discussed then, you find it in a lot of documents by the Christian Democrats. I mean, I just put together a few of their resolutions that they put forward in the German Bundestag in the last 3 years. I mean, in 2002, they said we need an engaged policy to renew the EU perspective, and the government should offer all the countries of the Western Balkans, in return for reform and implementing the Copenhagen criteria like the rule of law, a path to the EU single market. That was in 2022. In 2023, the CDU-CSU December had a resolution where it said there needs to be an interim step in consisting of Beitritt zum EU-Binnenmarkt, joining the EU single market. And in 2024, March, the CDU again had the resolution in the Bundestag where it said Bosnia and Herzegovina, when it meets the criteria, should be offered the perspective of joining the EU single market. And of course, in December 2023, the European Parliament, pushed by the European People's Party, which is the family of the CDU, agreed with a majority in the European Parliament on a resolution, 13th of December 2023, which called on the EU to ensure that the EU is ready to admit any member state, any applicant state, Bewerberland, in the accession process into the EU single market when the country fulfills the condition. So basically, what I am hoping for, but this is not my fantasy, it's not wishful thinking, is that depending on who will be the key people in the ministry, the CDU could pick up these ideas and do something vital. Offer Albania, offer Serbia, offer Montenegro, offer Ukraine and Moldova, that if they meet the criteria, irrespective of the political games around when to open chapters, if they meet the criteria, they should be able to join the single market. And what I'm pushing at the moment with my colleagues here in Berlin and in other capitals is that the union says, the EU agrees, that it will be ready to admit them then from, let's say, 27 onwards. That any country that meets the criteria can then, from the end of 2027, with the next budget perspective, be fully part, like Norway, of the single market. And I think there is a real chance that with a CDU-led government, this could be German and EU policy.
That's very interesting to know. But this criteria that you're mentioning, it means that all the chapters should be closed. The negotiations process.
I mean,
No?
the chapter opening and closing, as we've seen, is like pulling teeth, right? I mean, it takes 10 years for Montenegro to open all the chapters, and it has closed 6. No, what it means is to say, if the Commission assesses that a country, and they do this regular report, and yes, it would mean a dramatic speeding up of reform. Because right now, it's not just that the EU is not serious, the countries are not serious either, right? So everybody's given up. The process fell asleep. Nothing's
Yes,
moved.
you know the sentiment in the region is the opposite, that the EU is not serious about it.
No,
But,
that's true.
let's
No,
not get
and
into
the
that.
region is right. The EU is not serious about it. But the response to this is that a lot of the good civil servants who work hard and don't get more money, at a certain point said, why do I do that? And they leave the civil service. Or, you only work exceptionally hard if you have an exceptionally attractive goal. And I think that's what we need. If Lithuania could conclude its whole accession negotiations in 3 years, which means the reform, if Slovakia could do it in 3 years, then obviously Montenegro, Albania, which have already negotiated or have been in the process for years, could do that in 3 years. But the goal must be real.
Yes. Gerald, do you see the appointment of a German special representative envoy for the Western Balkans happening?
I'm not sure, because the government has also said that there have been too many special envoys. And I'm not sure that's really necessary. We've had a special envoy. The German government had one, Manuel Sarrazin. But the feeling in the region, I think rightly, was he was a little bit cut out of policymaking. He could travel, but wasn't sure, with a coalition government that was complicated, whether he could really promise anything, right? So a special envoy who doesn't have the full backing of the prime minister cannot do much. If you have a prime minister with a clear vision, we didn't have special envoys in previous enlargement. We need to change the process, and then we need more high-level attention by the ministers to the region. I think that's...
region. What will happen to the Berlin process? Do you see it continuing as an initiative, or?
Well, I don't know.
Somehow scaled.
I mean, the Berlin process was a child of Angela Merkel. I also think it was a little bit of a substitute, a placebo. It's nice to meet. Like all these meetings that Macron has organized, the European political community. Leaders meet. But it doesn't mean that Serbia, Montenegro, and Kosovo and Bosnia really are moving towards where they want to move, which is catching up with the growth rates of Romania, the Baltic states, being integrated, being more stable and secure. So I can imagine that if there is a credible enlargement process, the Berlin process fades away.
Mm-hmm. And do you see any German initiative in pushing for the Kosovo-Serbia normalization dialogue?
Well, I mean, if we are realistic, I think 2 situations, both Kosovo and Bosnia, have revealed the limits of our current policy. I mean, in Bosnia, the policy has been really lazy intellectually. We've relied on a high representative, a steering board that I fear will be increasingly divided, depending on the Americans, if they take Orban's view on Bosnia. And the high representative is basically powerless. In Kosovo, we had a dialogue process, which, I mean, where are we? We've achieved we are now less advanced than we were 5 years ago. And I see more tensions, less trust, more fear among people, also in the north of Kosovo, about their future. More fear in Kosovo of Serbia and what it would mean if the Americans would withdraw from Kosovo. I mean, all this talk about withdrawing troops from Europe. Well, I mean, an obvious candidate would be the Americans in Kosovo, what that means. So I think for the Europeans, they cannot continue the way they have until now. It will be interesting to see what the new EU envoy will do. I mean, he's very experienced. I mean, I know him very well, Peter, from Bosnia, from Kosovo, for many, many years of joint work. And I think that here too, the key is for Germany to say, we are offering Serbia and Kosovo a real perspective, and then we are in a position again to ask for difficult decisions to be taken.
Okay, that's. I hope Peter Sorensen is listening to this, or you are sharing this view. So
Yeah, I'm talking
they
to
need
him.
clear plan. You're talking to him. And last question: if you had Friedrich Merz ear right now, what would you be your key piece of advice for Germany's role in the Western Balkans?
I would say, look at the last 30 years. We've had 10 years of war in the Balkans, or instability in Albania in the mid-90s. And then we had basically the US with some German support. I mean, Germany under Joschka Fischer in 99, 2000, very important. Pushing for the Balkans to basically put the decade of war behind. And it succeeded miraculously. You know, all the other areas of intervention, Iraq, Afghanistan, North Africa, West Africa, the Middle East, the Caucasus, everywhere where we tried diplomatically or militarily to intervene, it collapsed. The Balkans did not collapse. It's remained peaceful for 25 years. But now if the Americans withdraw, the legacy of Albright and Clinton and Fischer and the Thessaloniki Promise of 2003, it's up to Germany to maintain it, together with the other Europeans, and to complete it. The promise of the Sarajevo summit, I was there in 1999. Many of the leaders who were there are retired, many died.
Are
Ahtisaari
no longer,
died.
active. Yeah.
So in 1999 in summer, the promise in Sarajevo, just after the Kosovo War, was the whole region will be integrated to make war unthinkable like it is in Western Europe. And Merz, in the next 4 years, in the interests of European stability, must push to complete this. So no longer this slow process with no credible goals. They're waiting for Godot, as Eddie Rama put it. Really pushing.
No sleeping, no slow. Time for action.
Yes, and
Thank you
don't
so
let
much,
the bride
Gerald.
stay in the church and don't come and pick her up.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's why I think the region has all eyes on Berlin now, and that's why I find this and your bold insights really interesting and welcome them. We will be watching closely what the new government will do in the region, especially when it comes to EU enlargement or the entering the EU single market. And all this tricky relationship, transatlantic relationship. Thank you very much for talking to Balkans Debrief, Gerald Knaus.
Thank you and best wishes from Berlin.